If you're in urban areas and you are on housing, then it's also a bigger conversation because, like we have said time before, that Kenya, as well as very many African countries, are rapidly urbanizing. So people are actually moving into urban areas. These urban areas are not necessarily expanding as well as, watu wakuji na shamba yao. They're coming to find the land in the urban areas.
Yeah.
So what's happening to that? And so let's have that conversation about urbanization and the future of urbanization in Africa with the Cabinet Secretary. The last time she was here, she made sure that we said it all.
Okay.
Lands, public works, housing, urban development. Cabinet Secretary Alice Wahome. I got that
Thank
right
you
this
very
time?
much. Thank you. You did it right.
Very well.
Okay.
Yes.
Very well. And Anaclaudia Rossbach, who is UN Under Secretary General and the Executive Director of the UN Habitat. Good morning.
Good morning. Morning,
Karibuni
Eric
sana.
and Mariam.
It's good to have you here, ladies. The thing that we usually do with our guests when you come in is we give you the day's quote. Some words that were said by somebody, and let's see how you relate with them today. Mariam has the quote.
Right. I'll share the quote of the day. It's a quote by Sheikh Anta Diop, who was a Senegalese historian, an anthropologist, a physicist, a politician, a chemist, basically a man who did many things. Yeah, it's a lot. But he said, very simply, that the most powerful cultural weapon in the hands of a people is knowledge of their own history. The most powerful cultural weapon in the hands of a people is knowledge of their own history. Does it speak to you, Waziri? Waziris?
It does. It does. Indeed, unfortunately for us as Africa and a country, I'm not sure we are good at keeping our history, acknowledging our history,
Right.
and particularly recording our history, and especially with urbanization.
True.
Knowledge is actually maybe disappearing. So it's something we need to think through. And yes, you connect better when you know your origin, when you know your background, when you know your history, your roots.
Yes.
I think they call them roots.
Yes.
Yes.
True.
Yeah.
What about you?
And as we know, everybody's roots are in Kenya.
Yeah.
Kenya is the
Yes.
cradle of mankind.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Anaclaudia, welcome back home.
Thank you. Yeah, I call Nairobi home, so I feel home here. Thank you very much. I agree with all of you, and especially urbanization. And in my field, we don't talk much about culture. But as we urbanize, as we develop cities, it's critical that we bring culture to a central space. And there's a lot of knowledge, indigenous knowledge, for example, that we can apply for housing.
Yeah.
I get that. Very true.
Yeah,
We're starting-
the socio and cultural aspects
Yes.
of communities, not necessarily at the rural setup, but also at urban centers, should also be something that we think through, even as we go to building and construction. And that's what Anaclaudia is kind of referring to. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I love that we started with this quote because it's just a continuation of our chat outside.
Yeah.
When we talk about cities and housing, we think about buildings and bricks and so on.
Yes.
And we don't think about the work that you have to do in terms of social development, social engagement, actually building communities, because sometimes they come from the same places, but many times they don't, right?
Yeah.
So it's a whole process of refounding these neighborhoods and these communities.
Yeah. And I want to actually get into that question from that angle, Anaclaudia. We talk about Africa is urbanizing faster than any other part of the world. There's urbanization. But what does urbanization really mean? To many people, urbanization is people moving from their farm rural areas to come to these urban areas that's concrete jungles.
Yeah.
Is that what urbanization is?
Well, concrete jungles, yeah, it's one definition. But I think what urbanization means is, people are seeking for the opportunities that are in cities, right? And cities offer so many opportunities, not only for the residents in urban areas, but also for the resident in rural areas. Because if you don't have this connection, right, how they can access the health services, the training, educational services, but even the consumer markets, they are in cities, right? So urbanized urbanizing means not only bricks. We just spoke about culture.
Yeah.
So cities, they are responsible, for example, 80% of countries' GDPs. So cities are huge economic engines. Cities are the places where we build the critical mass, where we meet, where we discuss the trends of the day. It are the places where the citizens can better participate in civic life, right? You were just talking about politics and so on. It's much easier for people to participate. Cities are the places where women actually have many more opportunities because they can count on a network of services and community and so on that sometimes they don't have there. So I would like that we think about cities in urbanization as in a different way, right? More and as an opportunity for societies to transform and to maximize the potential of being together in a place, to create a better living conditions for everybody.
All right. What about UCS? And is there a point to be made for trying to strike a balance between urbanization and then maintaining, our old way of living? Our
rural roots.
Yeah, let's call it that.
Maybe before we go very far, Eric and Miriam, I think we need to tell you and tell the country that Kenya is hosting the Africa Urban Forum, the second one. The first one was held in 2024 in Addis Ababa, and the second one is coming here in Kenya. Kenya was able to bid on behalf of Africa Union Commission, and therefore we'll be hosting the forum on 8th to 10th. His Excellency the President is the main guest because he also has other African heads of state joining us, being an African continental platform. And therefore, it is important that we tell people we are here, we'll be here discussing about urbanization, discussing about the growth of our cities. I want to see that indeed the rural areas, we don't want to have small informal settlements within the rural setup because you are asking what is it that we can do. So we are saying even within the rural setup, let's have like properly planned settlement areas so that we leave the rest of the land for farming. Land consolidation didn't really completely take off. We are now reducing our land parcels to 30 by 60. And this is agricultural land. So when we talk about cities being engines, the drivers of economic and social growth, we must also not allow destruction of our agricultural base because really we need that as much as we need properly planned cities. And therefore, societies and communities, when we think of concrete jungle that you are referring to, I think cities should never even be described as concrete jungles if we went by the planning that is expected within the cities, because you're supposed to have proper, sufficient spaces which are green. You're supposed to maintain that properly. The drainage, the sanitation, water services, access roads, so that, schools, all the public utilities and facilities that we need should be well planned for. And indeed, that's really what my minister is supposed to do together with the counties. UN Habitat is very keen on policy and ensuring that as we urbanize, we are thinking of the number of people moving in from the rural setup, because it is not the other way around. It is from the rural to the migration to the cities, to towns. So we now have, with the devolution also, towns within the counties growing. And therefore this planning must be well coordinated from Africa, from Kenya to Africa to the global setup. And that's why this conversation that we'll be having on 8th to 10th will help us to have one coordinated, consolidated voice, strong voice, because we will be dialoguing. And as we move from Kenya, then we expect next May to be able to attend the World Urban Forum as a coordinated continental bloc.
Okay, but also moving away from talk, from policy into practice, right?
Yeah.
Because, Waziri, like you've said, with devolution, we have seen the development of many new urban areas.
Yeah.
In fact, we even have policy, we have laws, the Cities and Urban Areas Act, and so on and so forth. And municipalities. So we have cities, we started with just 3. Now we have, Eldoret is another one.
5,
Which one are we
6.
creating next? Thika?
It's
Is it
Thika,
Thika that's coming up
being
next?
Upgraded, yes.
And Meru is also campaigning to be one, and so on. We have more cities. Nakuru is already a city.
Nakuru is already a
Right?
city.
And then now we have municipalities. Counties are creating municipalities and towns and designating these as municipalities and towns. But the planning bit, which you said is critical, before you even designate, it goes with the planning for it and the implementation of those plans. How are we doing on that, Waziri? Are we actually inhabiting municipalities and towns that are living according to plan?
I would say we are not. On policy, we have adequate policy. We could, of course, work on it and improve, but we have policy that should help us come up with the correct planning. We also have shared knowledge, experiences, and information from other countries. Partners like UN Habitat are very keen on governance, municipal governance, city, county governance, and so that when we plan the cities, we must think, where is the water going to come from? What number of population or people are we talking about? How will they be, governed? What are the structures? The county governments have the largest share in terms of planning, because all planning should be done under the county governance or county governments. We provide policy and guidelines for that purpose. My ministry has been giving a lot of support to the counties, including ensuring that the committees that are supposed to help the municipalities structure and plan are well, coordinated and trained, capacity building. And this, of course, we don't do alone. We have the World Bank, we have African Urban Development, we have UN Habitat, we have all these partners coming on board.
Yeah.
And but we must take it to a better level. That's what I would say. Yeah.
We're not doing so well. Anaclaudia, from, UN Habitat looks at, the entire world, and there are very many lessons to borrow from one area to another. If you look at how Africa is urbanizing, with the speed at which Africa is urbanizing, the speed at which people are moving to these areas, and the lack of planning coming ahead of the movement of people, are there parts of the world that we can say, this actually happened? And we're able to catch up. Let's say planning caught up with the people and they made things work. Or they stopped everything and said, nobody move. We're going to plan first.
No, I think the process of urbanization took different routes and shapes all over the world, right? And then the most urbanized areas, let's look, for example, Europe, right, went through a war and needed to be completely recovered and reconstructed. Cities was at the center of this process, and housing was actually at the center of this process, right? Was a key instrument for reconstruction. Then you have patterns of urban growth and urban development, urban sprawl that address some cultural aspects, ways of living. Like look at the North American cities, for example, they sprawled, they were planned based on the use of car and so on, right? If you look at the Chinese urbanization, for example, the industrialization and housing was also a central aspect. Now they are working more on planning. So, and Latin America, where I come from, Latin America was not expecting the accelerated rate of urbanization that happened in the 70s, in the 80s. Cities suffered a lot. They're still suffering because during this period, I don't know. I think there was some expectation that the people would come to the cities, build the cities, or work on the industry and come back. But of course, they never came back. So we are talking about one of the most, I think it's the second most urbanized region in the world, with still a prevalence of slums, very highly segregated cities. Why? because the housing policies, they didn't reach everybody. Because the cities, they didn't plan plan the land. So people, they needed a place to live. They came to the cities where they lived. They lived in areas, informal settlements. They went to the riverbanks, right? Like here. They go, they don't have an offer, they live everywhere. So now they're trying to fix. And they are very interesting experiences from Latin America. So first lesson, what you shouldn't do.
Right.
You shouldn't minimize the pressure of urbanization. You need to prepare to respond, and you need to work on urban planning, and you need to work on housing. I agree with Alice. The awareness in Kenya at the local level, at the national level, and at the continental level is fantastic. Fantastic. The fact that Kenya is going to host the African Urban Forum is a sign of that. Just yesterday, I came from a retreat with the diplomatic course with UN Habitat, and I see that everybody is looking now at urbanization with a different lens. You know, it's not only, okay, it's a big problem. No, it is an opportunity, and we have to address. So my point here is there's no linear situation, and then the overall context of the world changed because migration flows changed, patterns changed, right? There's also a huge impact on secondary cities. They are growing actually the most in Africa, right? Not only the big metropolis. We feel that because we are here in Nairobi, but there is a significant, you just mentioned the names of the new cities. What's that?
Yes.
Right?
Nakuru, Thika,
It is the
Eldoret.
same pattern that's happening in Latin America everywhere. People are going more also to secondary cities. So you have this new trend. So you have new trends, migration trends. You have the climate. So right now, we need, when we think about urbanization, we cannot just think about building houses anywhere. We have to be really conscious of where we build, because depending on where we build, it will affect the natural resources, water, drainage, everything. The urban sprawl, the natural surroundings, and we see cities suffering from that all over. I mean, floodings are affecting cities in Europe. Fires are affecting cities in North America. It's not only an issue of the global south, right? So we need to do it right, because these vulnerable people, they are the ones first affected when there's a disaster, and the materials that we used, how we build. I mean, densities. We're just looking at the images there. I mean, densities is the way to go, because we have to preserve land, and not only in Kenya.
I'm going to ask this.
We are preferring to go up instead
as
of
opposed to spreading sideways.
We started with the G+4, ground +4. Now we have migrated to ground +10, +14, even +20.
I'm going to ask.
Yes.
What can we do now? Because what Anaclaudia was painting is basically what we're living through right now, which is this rapid urbanization without very good planning, and then the floodings, and then informal settlements, and then and there's things that are happening, affordable housing being one of them. But from a city planning perspective, for these cities that are coming in, Thika, Nakuru, all the places, for Nairobi that's already a big city, and Mombasa and Eldoret, etc., what stopgaps should we be doing right now so that 10 years from now we're not saying again, oh my God, we could have nipped this in the bud?
You see, it is estimated that half of Africa population by maybe 2050 will be living in the urban areas. And that includes Kenya itself. We are, of course, migrating at a level, the growth of population is around 4% from the rural to the cities. So, of course, are we expanding the facilities? What are we doing about the infrastructure? We have the policy in place. What now we need to think through is how do we deal with the population that is already in town and the population expected every year to move into those cities without the facilities that we are talking about, without sufficient water. So it's a huge job, and that's why when the government talks about affordable housing, is one of the critical facility, one of the critical social amenity that you need to start talking about being a city or being a town. If you cannot house the population, then you can't even start thinking about the rest of the infrastructure. So, but I think planning, especially at the ground level, the planning should be in place. every new town that comes must first come up with a land use development plan for new towns. And our governors know that, because really they are the executives at the county, and they have the opportunity, not just a problem, to even create new towns that will be model towns that will help us. Of course, you can't create new towns every day, but you can also fix the towns in the rural setups, in our counties, are not as congested as we have, for example, in the big cities. So I see an opportunity for them to start working very seriously, so that they provide water, they provide proper access road. Sufficient access roads also speaks to security for the people, for the communities. They need sufficient facilities within, so that transportation to schools shouldn't really happen. In well-planned cities, people should, at least the children should go to school within the communities that they live in, walking distance.
Yes.
And that will have a big impact on the transportation problem or cost, even for the people.
Right.
So I think that I agree with Anaclaudia that we need to see this as opportunities of engaging investment, engaging partners, engaging governments all over, world over. But Africa must be able to speak to the problem and also speak to the challenge, providing local solutions, because we are not when we speak like going to Singapore, or we are going to do a Singapore in Kenya, we are saying, if Singapore is a well-planned country, why don't we
plan as well
and do it here also in Kenya?
All right, hold on, thought. We have to take a short break,
Yeah.
but we'll be right back, and we'll talk about the Africa Urban Forum. We'll also discuss, maybe from a planning perspective, we've talked about affordable housing being one of these stopgaps. Where does that fit in our urban planning? We had a planner here who gave the example of Nairobi and how it was zoned when the city was being created, and how we've just lost track of that, right? So how does affordable housing fit into our planning? How does this fit into Africa's urban plan as well? That's what we'll talk about in the next half hour. Hashtag is Fixing the Nation and TV. We'll be right back after this.
Fixers Online are sharing their thoughts. Shaman HQ says, our cities are expanding faster than infrastructure, water systems, sewerage, stormwater drainage, especially with the flooding we've seen of late. How do we close this gap instead of, playing catch-up? How do we actually... Well, we have to play catch-up first and then get ahead of this gap.
We have to play catch-up. Like in housing alone, we have a deficit of 2 million housing units. And that's now the catch-up we have to do. As we catch up with the current, where we need at least 200,000 housing units. And I think the catch-up also in infrastructure, water.
And you have to start somewhere.
You have to start somewhere.
As well. And I think housing is a powerful way to start, because if you look at cities infrastructure, if you look around, if you go out of this building and look around, what is the main composition of a city? It's housing.
Yep.
The majority of the buildings are housing. So if the affordable housing program is already looking at land that is well located, that's well connected, which is the case, for example, of the Mukuru project that I visited, very close to the CBD and so on, then you are already addressing one of the big problems that we face right now in terms of housing globally, which is housing, in the outskirts, far away, and so on. So if we start with location, we start well. And housing is one of the most expensive, actually, aspects of urban planning. So if there's an opportunity to start with housing, and we shelter people and we house people right from the beginning, it's great, because housing, as I was just mentioning, is an entry point for, economic inclusion. It's an entry point for participation and for social integration. So it's a lift. It's a big lift that's out there. Let's not forget that housing also means has a strong multiplier effect. many countries used housing to recover from economic crisis and so on, to overcome poverty. I mentioned China before. Hundreds of people lifted out of poverty.
Yeah.
Strong, massive housing program. Now the cities are transformed. So this is an interesting example because there was a strong investment on housing. And now if you look at Chinese cities, what happened in the last 10, 15 years is just fantastic. How they are now planned for the city, for the people, for the nature, and so on. If I look at Brazil, for example, how many people were lifted out of poverty, and through a series of actions, but having housing as a central point. So let's not minimize the importance that housing has. But you are all right. I mean, the planning needs to come with that, and the infrastructure and so on. Yes. But I think we have to accept that there's no perfect story, and we have to catch on the opportunities that are out there.
That present themselves.
And then sometimes, and you mentioned, planning back then and so on, how Nairobi used to be planned. I think this is one thing that we have to overcome too, is the way we planned in the past, following some mental models that don't apply necessarily to different contexts, to the African context or to the global South context. We have to shift away from these mental models and really look at the realities that we have, the cultural aspects, because if you really embed the cultural aspects, you can have an amazing cultural diversity in cities. So cities can be this spot of diversity, integration, vibration, and so on, because you can connect different cultures from different parts. So for me, looking at the reality that we have, accepting that there's no perfect menu and so on. We have our tools, city planning, planning for the women, planning for climate change. They are all good. Waste management and so on. But they will only work if they are embedded into a local context. And our reality in each city, in each country, in each continent is different.
Yes.
And we have to plan simple in a way that people understand. Because if people are not engaged in the planning process, the old types of planning, technocrat, highly technical, nobody understands. We have to learn as professionals
how to speak to the people.
We have to speak to the people. Indeed, when you look at the cost of living that you referred to, you'll find that maybe housing is taking about maybe 30
more than
30% of the income.
The economists tell us, don't let it go beyond 30.
Nobody. No, I will contest the 30. But you can speak first.
At least not less than 30%, which then means is a very big component, noting that you also have health to take care of. You have food, you have school, you have all these other things that you need. And therefore, we cannot minimize that contribution through housing. And most people who are talking about maybe negatively about the housing, maybe they have not also understood that the person we are targeting is the person who may not be able to get a mortgage from the commercial banks because they don't have either, and they don't have a pay slip, they have no regular income, they don't have our day-to-day job like morning to evening. They are hustlers. The others, of course, are income earners of 20,000 shillings and below. And then, of course, between 20,000 and 150,000. Those people, they sit down with their pay slip, with their salary, they divide until they have a negative. They cannot be able to afford a decent home. And therefore, for me, the Kenya has already gone ahead. We have a local solution because we have a levy that is helping the country to develop affordable housing. And these people are not paying on the spot. If you have the money, yes. But it's one ID, one house. One ID, one house. And therefore, when we say one ID, one house, it means sometimes it could even be you and your child who is not living with you. So this is an open platform for Kenyans.
It's open to many. As we're talking about this, and Anaclaudia can also come in. How are people urbanizing in Kenya? Let's contextualize it.
contextualize it.
So for a long time, and Waziri, I'm sure you live in, even in your years, people would go from school, go to live with a relative in the city as they look for an opportunity in the city. And what is the idea? Kutoka block, that rural areas do not give you these opportunities that the urban areas give you. So the urban areas are giving people opportunities, economic opportunities, and many more. The economic opportunity being number one, and then other things come in secondary. Are cities really still addressing that? Or are they just addressing the fact that, well, people have come, so let's do houses for them. People have come, so let's think about where they're going to throw their garbage. Let's look at how they're going to get their water from. But we're not thinking about where they're going to earn an income from.
I think the local authorities previously were actually building houses. You know that.
Yep.
If it is like the city council of Nairobi and other cities were building some local houses for the staff, for their employees, and even for maybe other people. But generally, at least every other departments would do housing for their employees. You will be surprised. The National Housing Corporation was started before 1963. And therefore, it's not like the government did not have a plan.
Yeah.
The government had this idea, had the plan, but funding for housing is not a small feat. And that's why we are happy that the country has been able to overcome, to some extent, the question of funding through the levy. And that really is a very big achievement for Kenya. And other countries have to catch up and find out whether this solution, it wasn't an easy even solution or feat to achieve. There was litigation, there was protest, and even now there are people who are still feeling that this is not the right way to go, because why? It is getting into people's payslip. But the results of what we have done, like I can assure you now, by maybe next 2 months, we'll have 300,000 units that are almost complete. And you see, the question is, where are these houses? When we have just come from the Western and the Nyanza, and we've released houses there which are ready in every county. Every month we'll be releasing maybe a block or two. And you see, when you start, this being a government project, it's good to just now appreciate that where we are is that we are quite ahead, actually, from other. And I'm sure when other states come here, they'll be learning from Africa. Maybe South Africa has a good story to talk about, but it's not easy to do this work because you have to fund it.
Sure.
And for me, through the funding, we have been able to create other jobs, and maybe people are not seeing that.
It's an ecosystem.
The system is so huge, from Mama Mboga, from the people who cook around there, from the young men and women who are working, from professionals who have this job that they never expected now is here, and consultants, we have many disciplines that are applied now across that ecosystem.
Those are jobs indeed.
Yeah.
But that's not a long-term thing.
It is long-term.
The people, once these houses are done, the houses are done. I want to ask a question here.
But people are being born every
Jeremy
day.
is asking, what's the threshold of a city? Is it possible to achieve Singapore in 2 terms? That's one. And there's another question that he had asked earlier. Is it about time that we actually built a new city? Yeah. You gave the example, Anaclaudia, of like China. Go do an entire city, and this is a city, it's a university city. There's a university there, or there's a industry here. So people who are going to live here are going to be working in these industries, right? Is that a way to go? So that you're answering all those questions. Number one, it's properly planned.
Right.
You have, even if there's some level of segregation, yes, there are people who live here who are in this kind of level of income bracket and so on and so forth. But you also have mapped their sources of income to sustain their livelihoods.
Yeah. No, just to clarify, my example on China was how China recently has transformed their cities. So if you go to Beijing today, it's a different city than it was 15 years ago, and so on and so forth, right? Because you have clean air, the electric vehicles, green spaces, houses that are integrated to services, and the idea of proximity and so on. So this is the transformation I was talking about. I don't think importing models is feasible anywhere.
Right.
So Singapore is very specific. To start with, the land is public. So it's much easier to plan if the land is public. Then I stop here. There are several other differences between Kenya reality and so on. We shouldn't look at that. Even the 30%, I would like to disagree with you. We agree in many, many things, but the 30% is something also that we are capturing from the global north, because it's a parameter that's based on research and studies that were not made here.
Right.
Because as you said, we don't have people here not assessing housing. So the studies that they were made elsewhere, and they don't apply. Because you spoke about 20,000 income monthly.
If 20,000 shillings.
20,000. So 30% of that is 6,000. What can you do with 14,000? Come on. So it's not a parameter that applies. So we have to think about, that's the model shifting that we have to think.
That's what you said about the mental models that we
Mental models. So people here can afford less. They need a bridge. The levy, the affordable housing program, created a system, a financial system with incentives and subsidies that is bridging that. And this is a solution that was found in Kenya with domestic finance, no foreign aid involvement. And for me, it's very creative, very innovative, very local, and very simple. It's very simple for people to understand. And now producing 200,000 units in 3 years, it's a lot. Everywhere I go and I mention this benchmark, everybody is impressed. So my point here, yes, there's a lot that's needed. City planning, perhaps the connection with local economic inclusion, education, training, and so on. But let's think about housing as part of the process, and not let's try to avoid to think that housing only on the limitations of housing. There are many challenges and many limitations, but the way I see is that the urbanization is going. This country is addressing one of the most difficult challenges, which is housing. It's reaching scale, and it's reaching the lowest income segments. This is a big challenge. There are many others. They have to come, and I agree. And I think this debate needs to be there. That's critical that we're going to have the African Urban Forum here. And we are having these conversations outside with UN Habitat and so on, seeing which are the experiences we can tap. The work with local governments is fundamental because they are the ones to connect the mobility, to connect the services. They are the ones that are closer to the people, to talk to the communities and to work on. And then finally, I need to make a point on jobs. Because of course jobs are critical. We all need jobs, and I do think that the economy is a critical driver for people to coming to cities. But it's not only about that.
Right.
If you talk to the young people, they have dreams, they have aspirations, and perhaps they see women, right, young women, perhaps they see the cities as in their imagination as a space where they can tap on something, on higher education, on, entrepreneurial opportunities, right? Think about something differently. Let's think about the polis, and how cities have been important throughout the history of humanity.
So in other words, we are not going to stop the movement.
Where democracy was born in cities, philosophy and everything. This is in cities.
People will continue moving.
It's true. There's a mental shift that's clearly needed. Thinking through, and we talked about these opportunities as well, and it's good to hear from you guys because you have, what would I call it, a bird's eye view of all these things. But then there's also the fact that we're moving to a time when climate resilience is super, super important in everything that we're doing. Climate shocks are going to get a lot more frequent. We're not people who are used to heavy rains in February, but alas, we were flooding just the other day. climate resilience and youth resilience for the cities as we go. What does that look like? And is this part of the agenda for the African Urban Forum? Climate resilience and youth resilient cities as well.
Okay, housing.
I know.
Housing is taking,
look at this project that was just showing, right? The Mukuru.
The Mukuru.
Coming from shacks,
Yeah.
from slums, very precarious conditions.
Yeah.
Live in apartments in higher.
Of course, we are working, noting that the environment must be left better after all this construction and planning. You cannot plan without thinking about the youth, and that's why the youth in our program for housing is actually central, and not just housing. When we talk about other programs, the Nyota program, we are still making the youth central in terms of planning, because they are there and it's a badge. And we cannot come up with programs that are not absorbing the youth in terms of employment. And of course, when you go to other ministries, they have their own share. We have the diaspora ministry. We looking at even jobs outside the country, but also online jobs. All this ecosystem has not really been very well maybe exploited.
Yeah.
I agree.
And we need to encourage the president, because he has decided that this must be done. During his term, this has to be done. And you see, as you say, there is need for a shift. Who are you leaving to create the jobs or to get the jobs? It is all of us, including the nation, has its own share of employing, including you as an individual. You have a share where you work to ensure that. But the government finally has the responsibility to provide lasting solutions, sustainable solutions. But Kenyans must also be partners in some of these solutions. And I can tell you, I have seen a lot of the youth that you are seeing in our sites, because we are now close to 630,000 young men and women. I say young men and women, although some of course are up to 40, 45.
Yeah.
There are women cooking. And then the markets that we are coming up, 500 different markets at different constituencies, in different constituencies, will be employing people. And every market, is catering for the people who are coming to sell, let alone the traders on site in the market, but the people bringing in goods. We are looking at
Plus
between 4,000, those are the farmers, 4,600. Those are the people who now are in between. Then there is the farmers. So we must see all this as a good effort. And the discussion then in Nairobi will obviously focus on what better solutions can we have. What is the coordinated voice can we carry forward? What are the experiences from other countries that we can learn from? And so that we don't also get into pit holes where other countries have gotten into and they already have solutions. So we look at those solutions and pick and go, You don't have to research where another country has researched and of course you must adapt it. But of course you must adapt it to your local situation. Finally, you must assess, evaluate, and also bring it to the people for discussion. And the affordable housing discussion will not stop. Right. It will continue, because Eric is imagining that maybe after 10 years, then we will stop. No, there will still be more people coming. Yeah. The population will grow. Built. More houses being built.
So more jobs.
More jobs. Yeah. And also, of course, this will also bring the price, then the cost of housing down.
Yes.
Because, the cost of housing in Kenya, cost of land in Nairobi is actually among the highest in Africa. And that then speaks to why the houses are not affordable. These houses that the ministry is coming up with, the board is selling at between 4,000 and 7,000. With that kind of you have amount of money, you have a roof. Yeah. Of course, there are those going for 21,000 per month. For 25 to 30 years. You see, and nobody is asking you for any serious deposit.
Right.
We're talking about 5%. We reduced it. We changed our regulation. The last time I came here,
Yes.
we were asking for 10%, and
Now
we
it's
are
fine.
wondering, is this affordable?
Yeah.
So then, because you are calling it affordable, then it must be affordable. Kenyans put pressure on us. Members of parliament did, the public, the media, and we brought it down to 5%.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have to wrap up completely, but Anaclaudia, I'll ask you to just tell us, give us an assurance that Africa Urban Forum will go beyond talk, because a lot of these events tend to be a talk shop, but then when it comes to implementing something tangible, things get tricky.
Okay, I think the assurance is what's already happening in Africa. We spoke this whole program about the affordable housing. This is one advance. But also we have legal frameworks. We didn't mention the Special Planning
Yes.
Act, which is very advanced from Kenya. And I agree, there are so many tools that could be more explored. You have many countries in Africa that are exploring solutions that are putting housing and urbanization at the center
priority,
as we speak. I feel that the African Urban Forum is under the auspices of the African Union, so it has a political foundation, let's say so. There are many solutions on the ground by local governments, by national governments, in combination with international stakeholders, with local stakeholders, and so on. So this is there. And there's the political will, this broader also societal awareness about what urbanization means. And our conversation today is an example of that. And your role is fundamental, by the way. We need you. We need to have more and more of these conversations and to explore the different angles. After the African Urban Forum, as Alice mentioned, we have the World Urban Forum in May, in Baku, in Azerbaijan, and then we are bringing Africa there, and I believe Africa is really coming together. It's very beautiful to see how the collective thinking about that and the feeling of solidarity that countries have in sharing their experience. This is there. So Kenya has been also generously offering, hosting learning exchanges and so on. So the real is moving. We have COPs. We'll keep going at the global stage, bringing.
It's only positive from this
We
point.
are expecting 10,000.
And working on the ground.
Working on the ground, expecting 10,000 guests.
Between the 8th and the 10th of
Between
April.
the 8th and 10th. So that's also a big thing for us in terms of economic gain there.
And positioning Kenya.
Positioning
as
Kenya,
a global-
visibility.
Yes.
The president has already been accepted as the global champion for affordable housing, for housing for all. In fact, the theme is housing for all.
Okay.
And
Asante sana Waziri. Alice Wahome, Cabinet Secretary for Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development, as well as Anaclaudia Rossbach, who is UN Under Secretary General and the Executive Director of UN Habitat. We've been talking about that. So the second Africa Urban Forum taking place in Nairobi between the 8th and the 10th of April. Keep it here for the next conversation, which will be talking about seeds and who owns the seeds that you plant. That is coming up next.